There is an old and instructive observation made by countless court historians, diplomats, and students of power across centuries of recorded history regarding the genuine kings, the figures who held real, lasting command over nations and people, as distinct from the considerably larger number of men who merely occupied a throne without ever truly possessing the bearing, the discipline, or the internal sovereignty that genuine kingship required. The crown itself, these observers consistently noted, conferred remarkably little. It was the man beneath the crown, the particular quality of his mind, his speech, his movement, his relationship to wealth, that determined whether he commanded genuine respect and lasting loyalty, or merely the temporary, conditional compliance that fear and formal authority alone can purchase. Compliance that evaporates the instant genuine strength, reveals itself to be absent. This distinction matters enormously for anyone seeking to understand what genuine command and presence actually require, because the modern world, despite having largely dispensed with thrones and crowns, continues to operate according to remarkably similar underlying principles. Authority, respect, and genuine influence flow not toward those who simply occupy positions of formal power, but toward those who have mastered a particular, identifiable set of internal and external disciplines. Disciplines that ancient courts understood with considerable sophistication, and that the modern world, despite its considerable technical advancement, has in many respects forgotten or never properly learned in the first place. To carry yourself like a king, in the sense this study intends, has nothing whatsoever to do with arrogance, entitlement, or the crude, performative displays of dominance that insecure men frequently mistake for genuine royal bearing. It refers instead to a comprehensive discipline across 4 distinct but deeply interconnected domains: the governance of your own mind, the discipline of your speech, the command of your physical presence and movement, and your relationship to wealth and material resource. Master these 4 domains, as the genuinely formidable figures throughout history have consistently mastered them, and you acquire something considerably more durable and considerably more valuable than any formal title or position could ever provide: a quality of internal sovereignty that external circumstance, however difficult or however favorable, cannot easily disturb or diminish. Consider first the governance of the mind, because every other domain we will examine throughout this study ultimately depends upon this foundational discipline, without which the remaining 3 domains become, at best, a hollow and ultimately unconvincing performance. The mind of a genuine king, properly understood, is distinguished above all else by its independence from the immediate emotional pressures that govern the behavior of lesser men. Consider the particular vulnerability that afflicts the great majority of people in their ordinary daily existence, a vulnerability to having their entire internal state, their mood, their confidence, their sense of security, determined almost entirely by external circumstance, by the approval or disapproval of others, by the success or failure of whatever immediate undertaking currently occupies their attention. Such a mind exists in a state of perpetual reactivity, tossed about by every shift in external fortune, like a small vessel without ballast, caught in whatever current happens to be running strongest at any given moment. The kingly mind, by contrast, has cultivated what might be called an internal throne, a stable, settled center of identity and security that does not depend on the constant validation of external circumstance to remain intact. This internal stability does not arise from indifference to outcome, nor from some artificial suppression of genuine feeling. A king who genuinely cares for nothing experiences not sovereignty, but a kind of emotional poverty considerably less impressive than it might initially appear. Genuine kingly composure arises, instead, from a deliberately cultivated capacity to experience the full range of human emotion: disappointment, frustration, even genuine fear in moments of real danger, without allowing that emotion to seize complete control of judgment and action. Capacity considerably rarer and considerably more valuable than either the cold suppression of feeling or its unrestrained reactive expression. This discipline of mind manifests, in practical terms, through a particular relationship to setback and adversity that distinguishes genuine command from its many imitations. Consider how an ordinary mind, untrained in this particular discipline, responds to a significant setback with immediate, often visible distress, with a flood of anxious thoughts about what this setback means for the future, with a corresponding degradation in the quality of subsequent decision-making. As panic and anxiety crowd out the calm, clear thinking that effective response to genuine difficulty actually requires. The kingly mind, by contrast, has trained itself to create, even amid genuine setback, a brief but crucial interval between the stimulus of difficulty and the response that follows it. An interval during which the initial emotional surge can be acknowledged and allowed to settle before any significant decision gets made, ensuring that whatever response eventually follows emerges from clear, considered judgment rather than from the immediate, often poorly calibrated reactivity that untrained minds default to under pressure. This capacity, the deliberate creation of space between stimulus and response, represents perhaps the single most valuable and most practically actionable discipline within the entire domain of mental sovereignty, and it is worth examining the specific mechanisms through which this capacity can be deliberately cultivated. The practice begins with simple, consistent attention to the physical sensations that accompany emotional reactivity. The tightening in the chest, the acceleration of breath, the particular quality of mental noise that accompanies genuine distress. Learning to notice these signals as they arise, rather than becoming so thoroughly absorbed within them that no observing awareness remains available to interrupt their automatic progression into hasty action. With sustained practice, this simple act of noticing creates almost automatically precisely the interval of space we have been describing, an interval during which the kingly mind can ask, with genuine clarity rather than panicked urgency, what response this situation genuinely requires, rather than simply discharging whatever immediate emotional pressure has been generated by the setback itself. Consider, second, the discipline of speech, a domain the genuinely formidable historical figures across every era and culture have consistently treated with a seriousness that the modern world, awash in casual, unconsidered verbal output across countless digital platforms, has largely abandoned to its own considerable cost. The mouth of a king speaks rarely, deliberately, and with weight, a quality that stands in sharp and instructive contrast to the considerably more common pattern of speech that fills silence anxiously, that explains and justifies at excessive length, that reveals, through its sheer volume and its evident discomfort with pause, an underlying insecurity that careful listeners reliably detect regardless of the actual content being communicated. Consider how dramatically the perceived authority of identical content shifts depending purely on the manner of its delivery. A brief, measured statement, delivered with confidence and followed by a comfortable silence that does not anxiously rush to fill itself, carries an entirely different weight than the same essential content delivered through a flood of words, qualifications, and nervous elaboration that betrays, through its very abundance, the underlying insecurity of the speaker. This discipline of restrained, deliberate speech serves several distinct functions, each worth examining individually. First, it preserves and concentrates the genuine impact of whatever you do choose to say, because words spoken rarely and deliberately carry an automatic weight that the same words, diluted within a constant stream of casual verbal output, simply cannot match. A king who speaks constantly, who offers opinion on every matter regardless of its genuine significance, who fills every silence with verbal output, trains those around him to discount the great majority of what he says, precisely because the sheer volume of his speech provides no signal regarding which particular statements genuinely matter and which represent merely habitual filling of silence. King, who speaks rarely by contrast, trains those around him to attend carefully to whatever he does choose to say, precisely because its relative scarcity signals genuine significance. Second, the discipline of restrained speech protects against one of the most consistently destructive errors available to anyone operating within competitive professional or political environments: the premature revelation of intention, strategy, or genuine opinion before the appropriate moment for that revelation has actually arrived. A mouth that speaks constantly and impulsively inevitably reveals, sooner or later, information that more careful, more disciplined restraint would have kept appropriately concealed until strategic circumstances favored its disclosure. The king's mouth, by contrast, has been trained through sustained practice to resist this impulsive revelation, holding genuine intention and genuine opinion in reserve until the moment for their disclosure has been deliberately, strategically chosen, rather than simply surrendered to whatever immediate social pressure happens to be encouraging premature speech. Third, and perhaps most subtly, the discipline of restrained speech cultivates, through its very practice, the internal discipline of restrained thought, a capacity to pause it to and to evaluate a situation fully before committing to any particular interpretation or response, rather than the considerably more common pattern in which verbal expression and internal thought process occur almost simultaneously, with the result that whatever first impulse happens to arise gets immediately voiced, without the benefit of the more careful, more considered evaluation that a deliberate pause between observation and speech naturally provides. It is worth addressing directly an important nuance regarding this discipline of speech, because restraint, improperly understood, can devolve into a cold, withholding silence that generates suspicion and discomfort, rather than the genuine respect and authority we are examining throughout this study. The king's restraint in speech is not the restraint of someone who has nothing to offer or who withholds engagement out of indifference or hostility toward those around him. It is, rather, the restraint of someone whose engagement, when it does occur, is purposeful, attentive, and genuinely present, a quality of engaged listening and considered response that makes the relative scarcity of his speech feel like deliberate selectivity rather than disengaged withdrawal. The genuinely kingly figure listens with evident attention, asks questions that reveal genuine engagement with what others are saying, and speaks, when he does speak, with a quality of presence and consideration that makes clear his restraint, reflects discipline rather than disinterest. Consider, third, the command of physical presence and movement, a domain we touched upon briefly in our earlier examination of instant respect, but one that deserves considerably more extended treatment within this broader study of kingly carriage, because the body, properly disciplined, communicates a quality of sovereignty that words alone, however carefully chosen, can never fully replicate. The physical bearing of a genuine king reflects above all else an absence of unnecessary or anxious movement, quality of stillness and economy that stands in sharp contrast to the fidgeting, nervous gesture, the hurried, unsettled physical presence that betrays underlying anxiety, regardless of whatever confident words might simultaneously be spoken. Consider the particular discipline required to remain physically settled and unhurried, precisely in those moments when internal anxiety or pressure most strongly tempts the body toward nervous, anxious movement, a discipline that, once mastered, communicates a quality of genuine internal security that no amount of confident verbal assertion can substitute for. If the body simultaneously betrays a contradictory anxiety through its restless, unsettled movement. This physical discipline extends into the specific domain of how a king occupies space, a quality worth examining in some detail because it differs meaningfully from the crude, aggressive occupation of space that insecure men frequently mistake for genuine kingly presence. The king occupies space deliberately and comfortably, without the anxious, apologetic minimization that characterizes lower confidence, but also without the aggressive, overcompensating expansion that characterizes a different and equally unconvincing form of insecurity, the kind that mistakes loud, exaggerated dominance for genuine, settled security. Genuine kingly occupation of space communicates simply this: I belong here, fully and comfortably, without any need to either shrink myself apologetically or expand myself aggressively in order to justify or assert that belonging. Consider, too, the particular discipline of unhurried movement, a quality we touched upon in our examination of instant respect, but that deserves emphasis here as a core component of kingly bearing more broadly. The king moves through his environment at a pace that reflects genuine internal security, rather than anxious urgency, neither rushing through transitions in a manner that suggests discomfort with his own presence, nor moving so slowly as to suggest performative, self-conscious display rather than genuine, natural ease. This unhurried quality of movement, cultivated through sustained, deliberate practice, communicates to everyone observing a quality of settled confidence that words alone, however skillfully chosen, can never fully substitute for if the physical body simultaneously communicates a contradictory anxiety through hurried, unsettled movement. Consider, fourth, and finally, the relationship to money and material wealth, a domain that genuine historical kings, despite their formal command of vast treasuries, frequently understood with considerably more sophistication than the simple accumulation and display of wealth that popular imagination often associates with royal power, in a domain that offers, perhaps, the most immediately practical and most directly actionable guidance of everything we will examine throughout this entire study. The genuinely kingly relationship to money is characterized above all else by mastery rather than dependence, a quality considerably distinct from either the simple accumulation of wealth or its ostentatious display, both of which frequently reflect, upon closer examination, a kind of dependence on money's psychological power rather than genuine mastery over it. Consider the particular vulnerability that afflicts those whose sense of security and identity becomes excessively entangled with their financial circumstances. Individuals whose mood, confidence, and behavior toward others shifts dramatically and visibly according to the current state of their finances. Individuals who, despite considerable wealth, remain in a position of genuine psychological dependence upon that wealth's continued presence, a dependence that any sufficiently attentive observer can detect, and that undermines the very quality of secure, settled command that genuine kingly bearing requires. The king's relationship to money, by contrast, reflects a quality of genuine independence, an internal security that does not fluctuate according to the current state of his finances, a quality that paradoxically tends to produce considerably more durable financial success than the anxious, dependent relationship to wealth that afflicts so many people who, despite working tirelessly to accumulate financial resource, never quite escape a persistent, underlying anxiety regarding its potential loss. This independence manifests, in practical terms, through several specific disciplines worth examining individually. First discipline involves living consistently below one's actual financial capacity, maintaining a margin of genuine financial slack that provides real, substantive security, rather than the precarious, fully extended financial position that leaves an individual perpetually vulnerable to even modest setbacks or disruptions. This discipline, while simple to articulate, proves considerably more difficult to maintain in practice, particularly as financial capacity increases and the natural temptation toward proportionate increases in spending and lifestyle correspondingly intensifies. A genuinely kingly approach to wealth resists this natural escalation, maintaining deliberate margin and genuine financial slack even as capacity grows, precisely because this margin provides the substantive, durable security from which genuine confidence and independence can authentically arise, rather than the brittle, performance-dependent confidence of someone whose lifestyle has expanded to consume the entirety of his available resource, leaving no genuine cushion against the inevitable fluctuations that any sufficiently long financial life will eventually encounter. The second discipline involves the careful, deliberate avoidance of using material displays and consumption as a primary vehicle for communicating status and worth to others, a temptation that proves considerably stronger and considerably more costly than most people who have not seriously examined this particular pattern in their own behavior typically appreciate. Consider the particular vulnerability inherent in any strategy that depends on continuously escalating material display in order to maintain a desired impression among others, a most strategy that requires ever-increasing expenditure simply to maintain a static level of perceived status. Precisely because material display, once established as the primary currency of status communication within a given social context, inevitably faces the same competitive escalation and corresponding inflation that we examined earlier within our mange. Broader study of the law of covetousness. The genuinely kingly approach recognizes that authentic status and respect, cultivated through the disciplines of mind, speech, and physical presence we have already examined, proves considerably more durable, considerably less expensive to maintain, and considerably more resistant to competitive escalation than status dependent primarily on material display. The third discipline involves cultivating genuine competence in the management and deployment of capital, rather than simply its passive accumulation or its anxious protection, a distinction worth examining carefully because it separates genuine financial mastery from the merely defensive, anxiety-driven relationship to money that characterizes a great many people who have accumulated considerable wealth without ever developing genuine confidence or competence in its active, strategic deployment. The king understands money not as an end in itself, to be hoarded and anxiously protected, nor as a tool for immediate consumption and display, but as a resource to be deployed strategically, in service of longer-term objectives and genuine value creation. A relationship to capital that requires considerably more genuine skill and considerably more sustained attention than either simple accumulation or simple consumption, but that produces, over time, considerably more durable wealth and considerably more genuine financial independence than either of these simpler, more common alternatives. The fourth discipline, and perhaps the most philosophically significant, involves maintaining a clear, settled internal distinction between one's genuine sense of self-worth and one's current financial circumstances, recognizing that the two, however much contemporary culture frequently conflates them, remain genuinely separate and separable. This discipline does not require indifference to financial security, which remains, as we have already established, a genuinely important component of overall kingly bearing and capability. It requires instead the deliberate cultivation of an internal sense of identity and worth, secure enough to remain fundamentally intact regardless of whatever fluctuations one's financial circumstances might experience, across the inevitable variability of an extended life and career. A security that paradoxically frequently proves to be among the most valuable assets available to anyone seeking genuine, durable success in the accumulation and deployment of material wealth, precisely because this underlying security allows for considerably more clear-headed, considerably less anxiety-driven financial decision-making than the alternative, in which financial decisions become entangled with and consequently distorted by an underlying anxious dependence on wealth as a primary source of psychological security and self-worth. Having examined each of these four domains, mind, mouth, movement, and money, individually and in some detail, it is worth pausing to consider how thoroughly interconnected they actually prove to be in practice. Because mastery in any single domain, pursued in isolation from the others, frequently proves considerably less effective and considerably less durable than the integrated mastery that comes from developing all four simultaneously as genuinely complementary aspects of a single, unified discipline of internal sovereignty. Consider how directly the discipline of mind, capacity to create space between stimulus and reactive response, supports and enables the discipline of speech, because a mind capable of pausing before DUP's reaction provides precisely the foundation necessary for the deliberate, considered speech we examined as the second domain of kingly carriage. Consider, too, how directly both of these disciplines support and enable the physical composure we examined as the third domain, because a mind capable of genuine internal stillness, expressed through correspondingly disciplined, considered speech, naturally tends to produce the settled, unhurried physical bearing that completes the outward expression of genuine internal sovereignty. And consider finally how the settled, secure internal identity cultivated through all three of these preceding disciplines provides precisely the foundation from which a genuinely healthy, non-anxious relationship to money and material wealth, the fourth domain we examined, can actually develop and sustain itself across the inevitable fluctuations of an extended financial life. This integration explains why genuine kingly bearing, properly cultivated, tends to produce effects considerably more powerful and considerably more durable than any single isolated technique, however skillfully executed, could ever achieve on its own. A person who has mastered confident speech while remaining internally anxious and reactive will frequently find that anxiety eventually leaking through into physical bearing or unguarded moments of unconsidered speech, undermining the carefully cultivated impression that more isolated, superficial technique alone attempted to construct. Genuine, integrated mastery across all four domains, by contrast, produces a quality of consistent, settled sovereignty that holds steady even under genuine pressure, precisely because each domain reinforces and stabilizes the others, creating a unified, internally consistent presence considerably more difficult to disturb than any single, isolated technique could ever achieve in isolation. There is, finally, a broader and more reflective dimension to this entire study worth considering directly, because the genuine value of carrying yourself like a king extends considerably beyond the practical advantages, however real and however considerable, this carriage provides in terms of external respect, professional advancement, and social influence. The deeper value lies in the quality of internal experience that genuine sovereignty over mind, speech, movement, and money actually provides, an experience of settled, secure presence within one's own existence that proves considerably more valuable in terms of genuine quality of life than whatever external recognition and advantage this same internal discipline happens to generate as a secondary additional benefit. The genuine king, in the sense this study has examined throughout, does not cultivate these disciplines primarily in order to impress or influence others, however genuinely valuable that impression and influence might prove in practical terms. He cultivates them because they constitute in themselves a considerably more satisfying and considerably more genuinely sovereign way of moving through an inherently uncertain, frequently difficult existence, an existence that will inevitably present every person, regardless of formal title, position, or accumulated wealth, with genuine setbacks, genuine challenges, and genuine uncertainty, that no external circumstance, however favorable, can ever fully insulate against. Master these four domains, then, not merely as a strategic technique for generating external advantage, however real that advantage genuinely proves to be, but as a comprehensive discipline for cultivating the kind of internal sovereignty that no external circumstance, however difficult, can fully disturb or diminish. In doing so, you acquire something considerably more valuable and considerably more lasting than any throne, any crown, or any formal title could ever provide. A quality of settled, internal command that remains genuinely, durably yours, regardless of whatever external, fortune or misfortune, the remainder of your life happens to bring.